Today we are going to be covering getting started with quote folder automation. The basic outline of the class is going over the 4 basic automation steps. That is local and codebook material setups, creating quote items from the bid item setup menu, using the quick sub material entry, and then finally the populate folders menu. Without further ado, let's jump into HeavyBid. So within HeavyBid, we have a pretty basic bid item setup, and in no way is this going to represent a real-world scenario, but it is going to give you a very good outline of how these features work. So the first 2 bid items are going to be using the folder code in the local and codebook setup. Bid item 30 through 50 is going to be using the create quote items in the bid item setup. Bid item 60 will be using the quick sub material entry, and bid item 70 through 100 will be using the populate folders option. Now the first option is the material folder designation. What I mean by that is in your local and your codebook, so if we go to setup, local materials, as well as setup material codebook, you will see a folder column for each resource. That folder column designates what quote folder you want that resource to go into. All I have to do is add that resource into an activity, and the quote system is going to automatically know to create that folder for me. And based on the cost type of the resource, we'll determine whether it's going to be a subcontract folder or a material folder. Let's go and let's give it a shot. So in bid item 10, activity 10, we're going to add resource for electric. Click OK. And we'll give it a plug price of $10. And that is all you need to do. We're going to go to bid item 20, activity 20. We're going to repeat the process for a different resource. And we'll do our signage sub on this one. And once again, just to throw some cost in there, we're going to do a unit cost of $10. And that is all you need to do. We didn't do anything different than what you would have done in any other activity. Everything is done in the background. To see how that plays out, we're going to go up to Subsystems and Quotes. And I do not have any quote items, but I have my estimate has changed function. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to click on my estimate has changed. It's going to say changes have been made to the estimate that may affect the quantities and totals of the quote system. You want to update the quote system now? We're going to click yes. And you're going to see the 2 items that I added. It's going to ask me to add to a folder, and it's going to give me a target folder, electrical and sign. I'm going to click start, and now I have both of my items added. If I go into my quote sheet, you'll see I have my bid item, activity, and resource already added. And based on my cost type of 4 being a subcontract item, it is a subcontract folder. That is the first method of quote folder automation using the folder column in the local and codebook setups. Moving on to items 30 through 50, we're going to use the create quote item. And we're going to use our striping sub here. So all we need to do is we're going to go to setup, bid items, and in your bottom right you have a button that says create quote items. We're going to click on that, and we can basically go in and click the bid items that we want to add this resource to. So we're going to click 30, 40, and 50. I'm going to key in resource for stripe. If it was in my material codebook, I could also select it from my material codebook. And I'm going to designate folder striping. It's going to be my striping folder. I click create items. And you'll see 30, 40, and 50 are now removed from my selection list. But when I go to my tree view, I'll have activities 30, 40, and 50 for each respective bid item, as well as 4 stripe underneath those respective activities. To close out, all we have to do is hit cancel. If we go back to our tree view, you'll see now I have activities under bid items 30, 40, and 50. If I click on each one, you'll see I have 4 stripe. I have 4 stripe under bid item 40, and I have it under bid item 50 and activity 50 as well. Let's go to the quote summary and see what changes have been made. You'll see under create quote items that I don't have to go to estimate has changed to create the folder. However, whenever we have an estimate has changed, we always want to click it and update our quote system. That way, whenever we're looking at our quote system, we are for sure working with our most up-to-date information. If I go to my striping folder, you'll see all 3 items have been added. I have my 4 stripe for bid item 30, activity 30, bid item 40, activity 40, and bid item 50, activity 50. These did not have a plug value. You do not have to have a unit cost added to be able to bring it into the quote system. And that is using the create quote items from bid item setup. Moving on to the third option is using the quick sub material entry. To move into the quick sub material entry, you're just going to click on your estimate tab, and then the first option you have below it is quick sub material entry. We're going to click on it, and we're going to select any resource from our codebook, or we can click on the local material, and I'm going to bring in my general sub. You'll see it already has my folder code of sub, and I can individually pick a bid item activity, or I can go down to add to multiple bid items. In this case, I have bid item 60 designated for my quick sub material entry, so I'm going to click for bid item 60. We have a few options to the right, and that is how do we want to structure our activity code and our activity description. We're going to leave it as the default, which is to use the bid item code and the bid item description. So all we're going to do here is when we create the activity 60, it's just going to be a mirror image of the bid item. So the activity code is 60, the activity description is going to be quick sub material entry. We're going to click OK. And you'll see now we have bid item 60, activity 60. We have our quantity all pulled from the bid item. We go to our tree view. Bid item 60 now has activity 60 where it didn't have it before. And we have resource 4 sub, quantity 1, lump sum, pulled directly from the activity information. If we go to our quote summary, you'll see my subcontract folder was not added. I'm going to click my estimate has changed. I'm going to update my quote system. And it's going to ask me, do I want to create my subfolder? And I'm going to click Start to add it. My subfolder is now added. If I go to my quote sheet, bid item 60, activity 60, resource code for sub. And again, I did not put in a plug price. Again, you do not have to have a plug value in to bring it into the quote system. Now we've gone through the first 3 methods of quote folder automation. They are very quick, very simple. The last method is the Populate Folders option. This is going to be the most involved for initial setup, but it's also the most powerful option that you have. To start, we're going to go back to our quote summary. To access the Populate Folders selection, you're going to go down to Populate Folders. It's a link on the right-hand side of the screen in quote summary. Now, what it's going to do is it's going to bring up a list of options as well as the folders that you currently have in your bid. In this case, we have 4 folders: our electrical, our sign, our striping, and our subfolder. You have a couple options here using the Populate Folders. We can do add folder items, add subs and vendors, regions if we're going to use those, and we're going to cover that here in just a second. But we're going to ignore all this for the moment because we want to do an initial setup. So we're going to go to Setup Relationships. And I'm going to create a material folder. In this case, I'm just going to call it MAT, and it's going to be my material item. I'm going to make it a material folder, and what I can do is I can go and specify up to 4 separate resources, but what I can also do is, just using a 2 as a header, I can pull in any code that starts with a 2. And I can make that as generic or as specific as I want it to. We're going to click Save and Close. Now you'll see my material folder is already added, but I don't have any resources because I don't have any 2 codes in my bid. Let's go add some to the bid, and then we'll come back to the quote system. So we have bid item 70, 80, 90, and 100. They're all blank, but we have our activities added. We're going to pull from our material codebook. If we take a look at our material codebook real quick, you'll see I do not have any folders under quite a few of my 2 codes. So it's not going to be used from the folder code. So we're going to go back to our tree view. Bid item 70. I just happen to know these resources are in my material codebook. Otherwise, I can click the resource header and look up my material codes. But for activity 70, we're going to use 2A10. It's a bedding item. We're going to do 50 ton. We're going to move on to activity 80. We're going to use resource code 2EC10. And we're just going to make it simple. We're going to do a quantity of 50 for all of them. Activity 90, we're going to go 2MM01. And then for activity 100, we're going to do 2PDINA0530B. Now, I haven't added a folder column to my local setup. I haven't added a folder column to my material codebook. I haven't gone in and created a quote item using my bid item setup, and I haven't used the quick sub material entry to designate a folder. We go look at our local material, because anytime we pull from the codebook, it's going to create it in the local as well. You'll see I do not have a folder code designated under any of these items. So we're going to go back to our quote summary. We're going to go back to Populate Folders. And we're going to make sure the checkbox for Add Folder Items is selected. We're going to click the checkbox for our material items, and we're going to click OK. You'll see now we have plug value in place. If we go to our quote sheet, all of these items were already added to our quote sheet. That is step 1 using the Populate Folders method, but there's another step which makes it, in my opinion, the most powerful tool for quote system automation, and that is the ability to automatically bring in your vendors as well. Many times, companies will have to scroll through a list, and that list of vendors could be 100 vendors, it could be 200 vendors, it could be 5,000 vendors. You don't want to have to do that, and you don't want to have to try and remember which vendor does work in which region, which county, which state. You don't want to have to try to remember which vendor does this type of work. We're going to simplify that for you. So we're going to go up to our subsystems, and we're going to go to our vendor business contacts. And in this case, I am just going to use the very first one on the list, 4x4 Inc., because that's what we're going to add it to. And when you're in your system vendor setup, you have this whole section down at the bottom, and that is setting up products in regions. Now, setting up a project in region, If I don't have anything, in this case I had one product already and it's a concrete sub. We don't have any concrete items, so we're going to add a few here. We're going to go down to Setup in the bottom right. We're going to set up our products and our regions. So which items did we have? We had an electrical sub, we had striping, the product does not have to equal the folder. I'm just using that for ease of reference. So based on my products, if I assign a vendor this specific product, what I am telling HeavyBid is that this vendor can do electrical work, they can quote any kind of material item, they can quote signage, they can quote striping, or they can quote subcontract depending on what I assign to that vendor. Moving on to the regions, the region I can get to as specific as I want, or I can make it as broad as I want. I can make it what region I work in. If I work just in one county, in this case we just work in Harris County here in Texas, I can state what city within Harris County. If I'm working in New York City, I can specify what borough in New York City. If I work in multiple states, I can specify the state. If we're a larger company and we work in multiple countries, I can specify the country. I can get as broad or as specific as I want. For ease of demonstration, we're going to do north, south, east, and west. Now we have everything set up. Let's go and actually apply it. So for vendor 4x4 Inc., we're going to make them a material vendor, but they only quote in the north. So far so good. We're going to move on to our second vendor, AA Missildine. We're going to make them an electrical sub, and they quote everywhere. And I can continue this for as many vendors as I want. If I don't know where that vendor quotes, I can leave it blank. So once we have those set up, we can go back to our quote summary. Again, to access our quote summary, we're just going to go to Subsystems and Quotes. If we go back to our Populate Folders, you'll see we have Add Subs and Vendors. If I have the checkbox for Add Subs and Vendors, I can make it generic and leave the region blank, or I can assign it. So we're going to assign, we're going to go back to our setup relationships, and under our material, we're actually going to assign a product. We're going to assign material to that folder. So obviously our folder material, we're going to bring in our material product vendors. We're going to save our changes real quick. Close out. You'll see we still do not have any vendors. If we go back to our Populate Folders, we're going to add subs and vendors, and we're going to add it to our material folder. If we click OK, you'll see 4x4 Inc. has now been pulled in. If I go back to my system-wide vendors and go back, you'll see it was brought in based on the product. I can also get more specific. If I want to make if I want to make AA Missildine a material vendor as well, you'll see they did not get brought in the first time because they were not a material product. I can set my region to the south, save my changes. If I go back to my quote summary, bring in my populate folders and specify a region of the south, select my material folder, click OK. You'll see AA Missile Dyna is already brought in as well. Once I set this up for my system vendors, all I've got to do is go into my populate folders, click which folders I want to add, and then click populate. It's going to bring in my materials, it's going to bring in my subs, and it's going to bring in my vendors that I know I'm going to get quotes for those particular items. I don't have to go and search for my vendors. I don't have to search for my resources. I don't have to remember to create my quote items. I don't have to remember which items go into which folder. Everything is done automatically for you. Where it could have taken you a few hours to set up your quote system prior, you can have it done in the span of a couple minutes. And ladies and gentlemen, that is the 4 methods of quote folder automation.